My son thought I hadn't seen him doing something very strange near my car at night. When he asked me to drive him to the store, I smiled, handed him the keys, and said, "Have a good trip," as if I knew nothing. His reaction and what happened next shocked me. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The ceramic shattered against the linoleum floor with a sharp crack. "Dad, I need $50,000 now. This is life or death." Nathan's fist had struck the kitchen table with such force that my dinner plate flew sideways, sending fragments of white porcelain skittering across the worn flooring. The sound echoed through our modest kitchen like a gunshot. I remained seated, fork halfway to my mouth, watching my 37-year-old son pace frantically between the refrigerator and the back door. "Sit down, Nathan." My voice carried the same steady tone I'd used when he was 8 and tracking mud through the house. "We'll discuss this like adults." "Adults?" He whirled around, designer sneakers crunching on ceramic shards. "Those shoes probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget." "Adults don't live with their fathers at 37. Adults don't get threatened by loan sharks." The harsh fluorescent light cast deep shadows across his face, making him look older than his years. Desperate. I set my fork down carefully and rose from my chair, the movement deliberate and controlled. 35 years of engineering work had taught me to approach problems methodically. "You'll get everything after I'm dead, Nathan. Right now, it's time you grew up and took responsibility." His laugh was bitter, almost hysterical. "Responsibility? Don't lecture me about responsibility when you're sitting on $250,000 while your son gets his legs broken." I crossed my arms across my chest, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment settle in my stomach. The coffee I'd poured an hour ago sat untouched, growing cold. Outside, autumn wind rattled the kitchen windows, matching the storm brewing between us. "Where did this money go, son? The advance from your temp job? The $3,000 I gave you last month?" Nathan grabbed fistfuls of his hair, a gesture that reminded me painfully of his mother during her worst anxiety attacks. "That's none of your business. That's my money by right. Mom would have—" "Your mother isn't here." The words came out sharper than I intended. Margaret had been gone 15 years, but Nathan still wielded her memory like a weapon. And she wouldn't approve of this behavior any more than I do. "Don't you dare speak for her!" Nathan slammed his palm against the refrigerator door, making the old appliance shudder. "She understood me. She knew what it was like to feel trapped in this house." I studied my son's face, searching for traces of the boy who used to help me fix engines in the garage. That child had vanished somewhere between Margaret's funeral and Nathan's first trip to the casino. The calluses on my hands, earned through decades of honest work, felt rough against my crossed arms. "I've watched you throw away every opportunity I've given you," I said quietly. "College, the apprenticeship, steady jobs. When does it end?" "It ends when you stop treating me like a child and give me what's rightfully mine." Nathan's voice cracked with desperation. $50,000 is nothing to you. It's sitting there doing nothing while you're what? Gambling it away like everything else? The silence stretched between us, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent bulb overhead. Nathan's breathing was ragged, his face flushed with anger and something else, fear. Real, bone-deep fear that made my chest tighten despite my resolve. "Those men don't care about your principles, old man," he said finally, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "They don't care that you think I need to learn lessons. They want their money, and they want it now." I uncrossed my arms and stepped closer, close enough to smell the desperation on him. "Then you should have thought about that before you made the bet." Nathan stared at me for a long moment, his jaw working silently. When he spoke again, his voice was cold as winter wind. "Don't interfere with my life anymore. That money is mine, and I'll find a way to get it." He turned and stalked toward the kitchen door, his expensive shoes grinding ceramic fragments to powder. At the threshold, he paused without looking back. "This isn't over, old man." The television droned in the darkened living room, but I couldn't focus on the late-night news. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted to the ceiling, where Nathan's bedroom light had gone out an hour ago. The house felt different after our confrontation, charged with unresolved tension that made my skin crawl. I'd swept up the broken plate and finished my cold dinner in silence, but sleep seemed impossible. The leather recliner creaked as I shifted, reaching for the remote to lower the volume. That's when I saw movement through the front window. A figure emerged from the side door, not the front entrance Nathan would normally use. My breath caught. In the pale glow of the streetlight, I recognized Nathan's silhouette moving stealthily across the driveway toward my 2005 Ford Taurus. I killed the TV and eased toward the window, staying behind the curtain. Nathan carried a small flashlight, its beam dancing across the car's surface as he approached. What was he doing? The kitchen argument had ended 3 hours ago. My son circled the vehicle once, checking the windows of the house. Satisfied he was unobserved, Nathan knelt beside the front wheel well and popped the hood with practiced ease. The soft, metallic click carried clearly through the autumn air. Horror crept up my spine like ice water. I fumbled for my phone, hands trembling as I activated the camera. The screen's glow seemed blindingly bright in the darkened room. Nathan's flashlight beam disappeared under the hood, but I could hear the soft clink of metal against metal. 27 years of fatherhood hadn't prepared me for this moment. I pressed record, angling the phone toward the window. The video quality was poor in the darkness, but Nathan's movements were unmistakable. He was working on something in the engine compartment with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. My mind raced back to Nathan's teenage years when he'd worked part-time at Murphy's auto shop. He'd always been good with his hands, mechanical problems coming naturally to him. I'd been proud then, watching him diagnose engine troubles that stumped older mechanics. "What are you doing, son?" I whispered, the words fogging the window glass. "This can't be what I think." But deep down, I knew. The brake lines. Nathan was positioned exactly where the brake system connected to the front wheels. The metallic clicking continued. Tools against brake components. My hand shook so violently that the phone camera couldn't hold steady focus. Nathan's head emerged from under the hood, flashlight beam sweeping the driveway once more. He wiped his hands on a cloth rag, then stuffed it into his jacket pocket. Every movement was careful, methodical. This wasn't impulsive, it was calculated. I thought about tomorrow morning's routine: coffee at 6, quick shower, then the drive to the hardware store for weekend supplies. The route included a steep hill on Maple Street where I'd need to brake for the stop sign. Nathan knew my schedule better than anyone. The recording timer showed 2 minutes and 15 seconds. My son closed the hood with barely a sound, testing the latch twice to ensure it was secure. He cleaned the surface with another cloth, erasing fingerprints from the metal. The preparation was thorough, professional. Nathan pocketed the flashlight and moved back toward the side door, staying in the shadows cast by our neighbor's oak tree. He paused at the threshold, looking back at the car one final time. Even from this distance, I could see satisfaction in his posture, a job completed. The side door closed with a soft click. Seconds later, Nathan's bedroom light flickered on briefly, then off again, establishing his alibi. The careful timing made my stomach lurch with nausea. I stared at the phone screen, thumb hovering over the delete button. The video was dark, grainy, difficult to make out details. But I knew what I'd witnessed. My own son had just sabotaged my car, calculating my death with the same mechanical precision he'd once used to fix broken engines. The autumn night seemed colder suddenly, wind whistling through the window frame's gaps. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out the house's familiar nighttime sounds. 20 minutes ago, I'd been worried about Nathan's gambling debts. Now, I was worried about surviving until morning. I clutched the phone tighter, evidence of my son's betrayal burning hot against my palm. The worst part wasn't the sabotage itself. It was the professional competence Nathan had displayed. This wasn't desperation driving him to reckless action. This was cold, calculated murder disguised as mechanical failure. Outside, my car sat innocently in the driveway, looking exactly as it had 3 hours earlier. But underneath the hood, Nathan had planted my death with the same hands I'd once taught to change oil and replace spark plugs. The stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed slowly toward the bedroom, legs heavy with shock that seemed to settle deeper into my bones with each step. The phone felt warm in my palm, the recorded video a digital witness to my son's betrayal. Down the hall, Nathan's bedroom door had closed with a soft click moments after his return. I sat heavily on the edge of my bed, head falling into my hands. The familiar bedroom, double bed, scarred oak nightstand, Margaret's photograph watching from its silver frame, felt foreign now. Everything looked the same, but the world had shifted beneath my feet. My blood pressure medication rattled in its amber bottle as I reached for it with shaking hands. 2 white pills, swallowed with lukewarm water from the glass I kept by Margaret's picture. The routine felt mechanical, disconnected from the chaos spinning through my mind. I pulled out the bottom dresser drawer, fingers finding the stack of photo albums I hadn't touched in months. The leather covers were worn smooth, filled with fragments of a life that seemed to belong to someone else now. Nathan at 8 years old, gap-toothed grin, bright with pride, after rescuing an injured kitten from the storm drain behind our house. His small hands had been so gentle with the frightened animal, coaxing it to safety with infinite patience. "We have to help him, Dad," he'd said. "He's scared and alone." That same boy had just calculated my death in the driveway. I flipped through more pages, torturing myself with memories. Father-son fishing trips to Lake Michigan, Nathan's excitement over his first caught base, teaching him to drive in the empty Sears parking lot, his 14-year-old hands gripping the wheel with fierce concentration. "Slow and steady, son. Control comes with practice." The control he'd displayed tonight had been perfect. Margaret's death marked the dividing line in these albums. Before, straight-A report cards, family vacations, Nathan's plans for engineering school. After, dropped classes, mysterious absences, the gradual transformation from ambitious teenager to bitter young man. I paced between the window and bed, the same 12 steps repeated endlessly. Rain had begun outside, droplets streaking the glass like tears. The video played again on my phone, grainy footage of my son methodically planning my murder. "Don't be too hard on him, William," Margaret's voice echoed from memory. "He's grieving too." She'd said that during Nathan's first semester dropout, when he'd started staying out all night and coming home smelling like cigarettes and desperation. But grief didn't explain this. Desperation, maybe. The gambling debts had pushed Nathan past some invisible line where family love became expendable. $50,000 was worth more than his father's life. I touched Margaret's photograph, her smile frozen in happier times. "Where did I go wrong?" I whispered to her image. "The boy who cried over injured animals wants me dead." 1 o'clock came and went. My mind replayed every conversation with Nathan over the past year, searching for warning signs I'd missed. The requests for money had become more frequent, more desperate. The anger when I'd refused had grown sharper. But murder? I'd never imagined he was capable of crossing that line. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof with increasing urgency. I checked the video again, studying Nathan's careful movements under the hood. This wasn't a spontaneous act born from our kitchen argument. The tools, the knowledge, the systematic approach, all of it suggested planning. How long had he been considering this solution to his financial problems? 2 o'clock brought a different kind of clarity. The initial shock was fading, replaced by something colder and more focused. Nathan had made his choice. He'd decided that his gambling debts mattered more than his father's life. The boy I'd raised was gone, replaced by a stranger willing to commit murder for money. I'd spent 68 years building a life based on principles, hard work, honesty, responsibility. Nathan had rejected every one of those values, choosing instead the easy path that led him deeper into debt and desperation. Now he wanted to solve his problems with my death. The photograph of Nathan rescuing the kitten mocked me from the open album. That compassionate 8-year-old had become a calculating killer, and I'd been too blind to see the transformation happening in my own house. But I wasn't helpless. Nathan thought he'd been clever, planning what would look like a tragic accident. He'd underestimated his old man's observational skills and overestimated his own stealth. The video evidence might be poor quality, but it was enough to prove intent. More importantly, I knew what was coming. Nathan expected me to drive the sabotage car in the morning, expected the brake failure to kill me on Maple Street Hill. Instead, I would be ready. By 3 o'clock, the rain had stopped and my decision was made. I closed the photo albums and returned them to the drawer, sealing away the memories of the son who no longer existed. The man living down the hall was a stranger now, someone who'd calculated my death with mechanical precision. Nathan had chosen his path. Now I would choose mine. My alarm buzzed at 6, but I was already staring at the ceiling, fully clothed from the night before. Sleep had been impossible. The phone lay beside me on the nightstand, still warm with evidence of my son's betrayal. Down the hall, Nathan's snoring drifted through the thin walls, peaceful, untroubled by conscience. Gray October dawn filtered through the bedroom curtains, casting everything in muted shadows. I reached for my blood pressure medication, hands steadier now than they had been at midnight. The pills rattled against the amber bottle, 2 white tablets, swallowed with water that tasted like determination. The shower ran hot, steam fogging the bathroom mirror until my reflection disappeared completely. Fitting. The man who'd raised Nathan with infinite patience was gone. What remained was someone harder, more practical. Someone who understood that love without boundaries becomes enablement, and enablement leads to this, standing under scalding water, washing away 37 years of sentiment. I dressed methodically, work shirt, dark pants, leather belt worn smooth by decades of routine. In the mirror, my reflection looked different. The same weathered face, the same gray stubble, but something fundamental had changed behind my eyes. The boy I'd raised died with his mother. This man in my house was a stranger. The kitchen felt hollow at 6:30, autumn chills seeping through the windows despite the furnace's efforts. I set the table for 2, maintaining the facade of normalcy. Nathan's favorite breakfast: thick-cut bacon, scrambled eggs, buttered toast. Psychological warfare disguised as paternal care. Coffee brewed while I replayed the video one final time. Nathan's confident movements under the hood, wiping away fingerprints, testing the latch. Professional. Calculated. My son had planned this murder with the same attention to detail I'd once taught him for school projects. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd raised him to be thorough. By 7 o'clock, preparation became meditation. Every action deliberate, arranging Nathan's plate just so, setting the car keys on their usual hook, rehearsing my lines for the coming performance. In the reflection of the kitchen window, I practiced the expression of a trusting father. "Have a safe trip, son." The words felt like broken glass in my mouth, but Nathan had made his choice. Now I would offer him the chance to prove his innocence, or damn himself with his willingness to risk my life for grocery money. My father had taught me about tough love when I was 16, caught in a lie about my whereabouts. "William," he'd said, "sometimes loving someone means letting them face the consequences of their choices." I'd resented him then. Now I understood. The coffee tasted bitter, matching my mood. Outside, suburban Arlington Heights was waking up, porch lights flickering on, newspapers thudding against driveways, the distant hum of early commuters. Normal Saturday morning sounds in a world that no longer felt normal. I thought about Margaret, how she'd handled Nathan's rebellious phases with firm kindness. "Don't let him manipulate you," she'd warned during his college dropout crisis. "Love him, but don't enable his excuses." If she could see us now, would she approve of this test? Or would she find another way? But Margaret wasn't here to offer alternatives, just me, the sabotaged car, and the son who'd calculated my death with mechanical precision. The plan was simple. Offer Nathan the keys without hesitation. Watch his reaction. An innocent man would take them gratefully, drive to the store, return safely. A guilty man would find excuses, create delays, protect himself while maintaining the facade of concern for dear old dad. Nathan's alarm buzzed upstairs at 7:30. The sound cut through my meditation like a blade. I poured a second cup of coffee, hands steady as granite. 37 years of fatherhood had taught me to read Nathan's moods, his tells, his manipulation tactics. Today those skills would serve a different purpose. I heard his feet hit the floor above me. Showtime. Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway at 8:45, hair still damp from his shower, wearing weekend clothes that probably cost more than my monthly utilities. I sat at the kitchen table, newspaper spread before me, reading glasses perched on my nose, the picture of a peaceful Saturday morning father. "Morning, Dad." His voice carried forced cheerfulness, testing the waters after last night's explosion. "Thanks for making breakfast." The bacon was still warm, eggs perfectly scrambled the way he'd liked them since childhood. I'd arranged everything with deliberate care, weaponizing his favorite meal. "Sleep well, son?" Like a baby. Nathan settled into his chair, attacking the food with manufactured enthusiasm. But I caught the nervous tells, touching his hair repeatedly, rapid blinking when he thought I wasn't watching. Guilt had a way of making itself known. We ate in relative silence, the morning news murmuring from the small television on the counter. Nathan kept glancing at the car keys hanging from their hook by the back door. The keys to his murder weapon, prominently displayed like bait in a trap. "My car's still in the shop," he said eventually, stabbing at his eggs. "That transmission thing is taking longer than Mike promised." I nodded sympathetically over my coffee cup. These older cars, they're always something, but at least Mike's honest about the work. Nathan's laugh sounded hollow. "Yeah, honest. That's worth something, I guess." The irony hung between us like smoke. I folded my newspaper carefully, buying time to study his face. 37 years of fatherhood had taught me to recognize when Nathan was building up to ask for something. The signs were all there: the careful tone, the preparatory small talk, the way he avoided direct eye contact. "Actually, Dad, I was wondering." Nathan pushed eggs around his plate, creating abstract patterns. "Could you maybe run to Jewel Osco today? We're completely out of milk, and I promised Mike I'd meet him later to look at another car." There it was. The request wrapped in casual necessity, designed to sound like a favor rather than a death sentence. I reached for the car keys without hesitation, my movements deliberately calm and grandfatherly. "Of course, son. Here you go." I held out the keys, watching his face carefully. "Have a safe trip." Nathan's hand froze halfway to the keys, fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. His eyes searched my face for suspicion, finding only paternal concern. The moment stretched between us, heavy with unspoken knowledge. "Actually," Nathan's voice cracked slightly and he cleared his throat. "Actually, my leg's been bothering me since that pickup game yesterday. You know how it is with touch football. Too old to be playing with kids half my age." I'd never heard about any football game. The lie materialized fully formed, complete with rueful self-deprecation. But Nathan's hand was shaking now, and sweat beaded along his hairline, despite the morning chill. "That's too bad, buddy." I kept my voice warm, understanding. "But it's an automatic transmission. Won't be much pedal work involved." The color drained from Nathan's face. He grabbed his left thigh theatrically, wincing for effect. "It's not just the pedal, Dad. The whole leg is stiff. Getting in and out of the car, you know? Maybe you could just—" "Nathan?" I set down my coffee cup, meeting his eyes directly. "I insist. You're young. I'm not getting any younger. Besides, you know the way to Jewel Osco better than I do these days." The kitchen fell silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the distant murmur of morning television. Nathan stared at the keys in my outstretched hand like they were a coiled snake. Sweat was visible now, trickling down his temple despite the autumn cool. This was the moment of truth. An innocent man would take the keys, drive to the store, return with milk and stories about traffic or long checkout lines. A guilty man would continue inventing obstacles, protecting himself while maintaining the charade of filial duty. Nathan's breathing had become shallow, rapid. His eyes darted between the keys and my face, searching for some sign that I knew what he'd done to the car. But I maintained the expression I'd practiced in the bathroom mirror, trusting, slightly concerned about his sudden leg pain, nothing more. "You're sure you don't mind?" Nathan's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mind? Son, you're doing me a favor. I've got plenty to keep me busy here." Slowly, reluctantly, Nathan reached out and took the keys. They jangled softly in his trembling grip, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet kitchen. His face had gone ashen, but he managed a weak smile. "Thanks, Dad. I'll be back in an hour." I watched him stand on unsteady legs, the phantom football injury forgotten in his nervousness. The keys disappeared into his jacket pocket, and Nathan headed toward the garage door with the measured steps of a man walking to his execution. "Nathan?" I called softly. He turned back, hope and terror warring in his expression. "Drive carefully, son. I love you." The words hit him like physical blows. For a moment, I thought he might break down, confess everything, throw the keys back at me, and beg forgiveness. Instead, he nodded quickly and disappeared through the garage door. I remained seated at the kitchen table, listening to the garage door rumble open. The garage door's mechanical rumble echoed through the house as I moved from the kitchen to the living room window, positioning myself at the same spot where I'd witnessed Nathan's sabotage 12 hours earlier. Through the glass, I could see his silhouette in the garage, keys clutched in his hand like a weapon he didn't want to use. Nathan walked around the Ford Taurus slowly, running his hand along the hood, checking the tires with exaggerated care. A man performing the pantomime of vehicle inspection while knowing exactly what lurked beneath the surface. The morning shadows cut sharp lines across the garage floor, creating a theater of black and white where my son prepared to risk his father's life for money. At exactly 9:02, Nathan opened the driver's door. The hinges creaked, a sound I'd been meaning to oil for months. Strange how trivial maintenance issues seemed important now, when they might be the last sounds associated with this car. I gripped the windowsill, knuckles white against the painted wood. This was the moment that would define us both. An innocent man would slide behind the wheel without hesitation. A guilty man would. Nathan got in. The realization hit me like cold water. My son, the boy I'd taught to drive in this very driveway, who'd once cried over injured animals, was actually willing to risk driving a vehicle he'd sabotaged. Either he was supremely confident in his mechanical abilities, or $50,000 was worth more than his father's life. The engine turned over with its familiar rumble. Nathan sat motionless for several seconds, hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead through the windshield. I couldn't see his expression from this distance, but I imagined the conflict playing out behind his eyes, desperation wrestling with whatever remained of his conscience. The car began to back out slowly, Nathan's driving unusually cautious. Every movement was calculated, careful. He knew the brake lines were compromised, knew the approximate distance he could travel before the damage became critical. The grocery store was only 6 blocks away, well within the safety margin he'd calculated when planning this murder. I watched my son disappear around the corner of Maple Street, taking with him the last remnants of the boy I'd once known. The Ford's taillights blinked once at the stop sign, then vanished behind the neighbor's oak tree. The suburban morning reclaimed its peaceful quiet, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I moved away from the window, legs unsteady with delayed shock. The kitchen seemed smaller now, the breakfast dishes a monument to our last normal meal together. Nathan's coffee cup still held a few cold sips, lipstick stains marking where he'd sipped while lying about his injured leg. The empty house pressed against me from all sides. 47 years I'd lived here, first with Margaret, then with both of them, finally just the two of us after cancer took her. Now I was truly alone, waiting to discover if my son would return or if this morning's departure would be permanent in ways neither of us had imagined. I settled into Margaret's armchair, the one I'd never sat in while she was alive, the one that still smelled faintly of her perfume 15 years later. The television remote felt foreign in my hands, another small reminder of how thoroughly Nathan's betrayal had altered the landscape of ordinary existence. Memories flooded back unbidden, teaching Nathan to parallel park in this same driveway, his teenage hands gripping the wheel with fierce concentration. Slow and steady, son. Control comes with practice. He'd mastered that lesson too well, applying it to planning my death with methodical precision. The morning news was starting, cheerful anchors discussing weather and traffic, like the world hadn't just shifted beneath my feet. I needed something to distract me from wondering if I'd ever see Nathan again, and from the terrible uncertainty about whether I wanted to. Coffee had gone cold in my cup, but I sipped it anyway, tasting bitterness that matched my mood. Outside, Arlington Heights continued its Saturday morning routine, joggers passing the window, children riding bicycles, neighbors retrieving newspapers from driveways. Life proceeding normally while mine fractured into pieces. 27 years ago, I'd taught Nathan that actions have consequences. Today, we would both discover how thoroughly he'd internalized that lesson. The boy who'd once defended injured animals had become someone willing to calculate his father's death for money. The transformation was complete. I reached for the television remote, thumb hovering over the power button. The morning news was just starting. I needed something to distract me from wondering if I'd ever see him again. The kitchen clock read 11:30 when I finally checked it properly, the bold black numbers forcing me to acknowledge what I'd been trying to ignore for the past hour. Nathan had been gone 2 hours and 15 minutes. A trip to Jewel Osco should take 30 minutes, maybe 45 with Saturday traffic. My coffee had grown cold in the living room, forgotten beside the television remote I'd never actually used. The morning news had become background noise while I'd paced between rooms, finding reasons to pass by windows that offered views of the empty driveway. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, checking the signal, strength, and battery percentage for the third time in 10 minutes. Full bars, 87% charge. No missed calls, no text messages. Nothing from Nathan. His contact information was still stored in the old address book Margaret had kept in the kitchen drawer, handwritten entries dating back to when we still believed our son would build a stable life. I flipped through pages yellowed with age, finding numbers for friends, co-workers, places Nathan might have stopped. The first call went straight to Nathan's voicemail after 6 rings. His recorded voice sounded cheerful, optimistic, a version of my son that felt like a stranger now. "Hey, you've reached Nathan? Leave a message and I'll get back to you." The beep seemed to mock my growing panic. "Nathan, it's Dad. Just wondering when you'll be home. Call me when you get this." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. 37 years of fatherhood had taught me to project calm during crises, even when terror clawed at my chest. But this wasn't a scraped knee or a failed test. This was something much worse. Mike answered on the second ring, Nathan's longtime friend and occasional enabler. "Carter Residence, this is William, Nathan's father. I was wondering if you'd heard from Nathan today." "No, Mr. Carter. Haven't talked to him since Tuesday." "Is everything all right? You sound worried." I forced casual concern into my voice. "Oh, he just went to the store hours ago and hasn't come back. You know how Nathan is with time management." Mike's laugh was uncomfortable. "Yeah, he gets distracted easily. I'm sure he's fine. Probably ran into someone or decided to hit the mall. Want me to try calling him?" "That's okay, Mike. Thanks anyway." The call to Nathan's workplace was more revealing. The auto shop manager sounded genuinely surprised. "Nathan? No, sir. He's not scheduled weekends. Thought he was spending time with family." A pause. "Mr. Carter, is there some kind of emergency?" "No emergency, just family coordination issues." But there was an emergency. Nathan had lied about his weekend plans, lied about meeting Mike, lied about everything except the part where he needed to borrow my car. Every deception served the same purpose, creating an alibi for his absence while my brake-sabotaged Ford Taurus supposedly killed me on Maple Street. By 11:55, I was calling Nathan's phone again. This time, it went straight to voicemail without ringing. Dead battery or worse, damaged phone from whatever had happened to my car. The house felt smaller with each failed call, walls pressing inward as possibilities narrowed to increasingly dark scenarios. I found myself pacing exact patterns. Kitchen to front window, 12 measured steps. Window to phone, 8 steps back. The routine provided structure while my world dissolved into uncertainty. Nathan's breakfast plate still sat in the sink, egg residue dried to yellow cement. The car keys hook hung empty by the back door, a stark reminder of what I'd set in motion by insisting he take the Ford. Had I sent my son to his death? Or had he simply driven himself to safety while planning mine? The blood pressure medication rattled as I reached for it early, stress accelerating the familiar chest tightness that had plagued me since Margaret's death. 2 white pills, swallowed with lukewarm tap water while staring at my reflection in the kitchen window. Where was he? The question consumed every rational thought, replacing engineering logic with parental panic. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked at passing joggers, life continuing its normal Saturday rhythm while mine spun into chaos. 11:58, 11:59. The digital clock seemed frozen, each minute an eternity of unanswered questions. Nathan's old address book lay open on the counter, his neat teenage handwriting a monument to the boy who'd once organized his life with careful precision. That boy was gone. In his place was a desperate man who'd calculated his father's death for gambling money, then driven away in the sabotage vehicle meant to be my coffin. 12 o'clock arrived with church bells from St. Mary's down the street, their solemn chimes marking another hour of Nathan's absence. I set the phone down on the counter with trembling hands, staring at its silent screen. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he was just... The walk from kitchen to living room felt like moving through water, each step heavy with accumulated dread. I sank into my worn leather armchair, the same spot where I'd spent countless evenings reading while Margaret knitted and Nathan did homework at the dining table. Different life, different family, different world. Phone in hand, I placed its screen up on the coffee table where I could see any incoming calls. The afternoon light had dimmed behind gathering clouds, making the living room feel smaller, more enclosed. From somewhere in the distance came the steady drone of a neighbor's lawnmower, the sound of normal Saturday activities continuing despite my private crisis. Traffic, that had to be it. Saturday afternoon shopping rush at Jewel Osco, lines at the checkout, maybe construction on Route 14 backing everything up for miles. Nathan had always been impatient with delays, probably sitting in his car somewhere drumming his fingers on the steering wheel while traffic crawled past roadwork. I rubbed my temples in slow circles, fighting off the tension headache that had been building since 11:30. The deep breathing exercises Dr. Morrison had taught me after Margaret's death weren't helping today. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. The rhythm felt mechanical, disconnected from the anxiety churning in my chest. Maybe Nathan had decided to get an oil change while he was out. The Ford was due for service, and Mike's garage offered Saturday hours. That would explain the extra time, the dead phone battery if he'd left it in the car during maintenance. Perfectly rational explanation for a delay that felt anything but rational, or he could have run into old classmates from high school. Nathan was social when the mood struck him, capable of hour-long conversations with people he hadn't seen in years. Time became meaningless when he was catching up, reliving glory days from his football years before everything went sideways after Margaret's death. The rationalization felt hollow, even as I constructed it. Nathan wasn't sentimental about high school, wasn't the type to linger over coffee with former teammates. His social circle had shrunk dramatically as his gambling addiction consumed more of his time and money. Most old friends had stopped calling years ago. Maybe this was punishment, Nathan's way of teaching me a lesson about refusing his demands for money. Make the old man worry, let him imagine worst-case scenarios while Nathan grabbed lunch somewhere and enjoyed his moment of power. Psychological warfare disguised as simple inconsideration. I'd seen that strategy before. During his teenage years, Nathan had mastered the art of tactical disappearance whenever we'd argued about grades or curfew. Stay out past midnight, ignore phone calls, return home with elaborate stories about helping friends with car trouble or studying at the library. Always just believable enough to avoid serious consequences. But this felt different, more desperate, more calculated. My phone beckoned from the coffee table, its dark screen reflecting the afternoon light like a black mirror. I picked it up with trembling hands, navigating to the video gallery where Friday night's evidence waited. The timestamp read 22:17, less than 14 hours ago, though it felt like a lifetime. Nathan's face appeared on the small screen, illuminated by his flashlight as he worked under the Ford's hood. Even in the grainy footage, his expression was calm, methodical. This wasn't impulse or rage driving his actions. This was careful planning, the same attention to detail I'd once praised when he built science fair projects or rebuilt motorcycle engines. Maybe I'd misunderstood what I was seeing. Nathan was mechanically gifted, always had been. Maybe he'd noticed something wrong with the brakes, had been trying to tighten a loose connection, or adjust something that seemed off. Maybe the video showed repair rather than sabotage. I zoomed in on his hands, watching his deliberate movements around the brake line junction. The footage was dark, unclear, but the methodical nature of his work was unmistakable. He wasn't discovering a problem, he was creating one. The engineer in me recognized the signs: deliberate loosening of connections, careful placement of tools, systematic weakening of a critical safety system. Nathan had known exactly what he was doing and exactly what the consequences would be. The only question was who he'd expected to be driving when those consequences arrived. Margaret's chair sat empty beside mine, her reading lamp casting afternoon shadows across the worn fabric where she'd spent her final months. If she were here, what would she say? "Don't make excuses for him, William. You know what you saw." She'd always been better at reading Nathan's manipulations, seeing through his practiced innocence to the calculation underneath. "He's learned that tears and apologies can fix anything," she'd warned during his early gambling problems. "Don't let him play you." But maternal love had made even Margaret vulnerable to Nathan's carefully crafted remorse. How many times had we both chosen to believe his promises over our own observations? How many warning signs had we rationalized away in the name of family loyalty? The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen, automatically brewing the afternoon pot I'd programmed years ago. Normal domestic routine continuing, while everything familiar crumbled around the edges. I could make fresh coffee, pretend this was an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Imagine Nathan would walk through the door any minute with grocery bags and explanations. Or I could acknowledge what my engineering training and paternal instincts both confirmed. Something was very wrong. I reached for the television remote, deciding distraction was better than endless speculation. WGN-TV would have mindless weekend programming, talking heads discussing sports or weather or anything except missing sons and sabotaged cars. The screen flickered to life just as the local news segment was beginning. The remote felt cold in my palm as I settled deeper into the armchair, seeking the mindless comfort of afternoon television. WGN-TV's familiar logo filled the screen, followed by the cheerful graphics of their weekend news program. Weather reports and traffic updates, exactly the kind of background noise I needed to drown out my racing thoughts. Good afternoon, I'm Jennifer Walsh with your Saturday update. We'll start with today's weather forecast, then move to local traffic and road conditions. The anchor's voice was professionally warm, designed to be soothing rather than alarming. I let it wash over me while nursing my cold coffee, grateful for any distraction from the empty driveway outside and the silent phone on my table. Weekend weather looked mild for late October, partly cloudy with temperatures in the 50s, perfect driving conditions, no excuse for delays or accidents caused by road conditions. The observation brought no comfort. Now, let's check in with Traffic Central for your Saturday road report. Jessica? I wasn't really listening as the camera switched to a young woman standing beside a map dotted with colored lines indicating traffic flow. Saturday was typically light for major construction delays, most commuter routes running smoothly compared to weekday rush hours. Thanks, Jennifer. Overall, traffic is moving well across the Chicago area, but we do have one significant incident to report. Emergency crews responded to a single vehicle accident on Elm Street in Arlington Heights earlier this morning. My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. Elm Street, 3 blocks from Jewel Osco, the exact route Nathan would have taken to the grocery store. The accident occurred around 11:45 when the driver of a 2005 Ford Taurus experienced complete brake failure while traveling toward the Jewel Osco shopping center. The cup slipped from my numb fingers, hot coffee splashing across my legs and the living room carpet. I half rose from my chair, then sank back, staring at the television screen as my worst fears materialized in the high definition. There was my car, or what remained of it. The Ford sat crumpled against a telephone pole, front end accordioned inward, steam rising from the damaged radiator. Emergency vehicles surrounded the scene, fire truck, ambulance, 2 police cars with their light bars casting red and blue reflections across the wreckage. The driver was fortunate, the reporter continued, sustaining only minor injuries in what could have been a much more serious accident. Let's go to our field reporter, Michael Chen, who's speaking with the victim. The camera panned across the accident scene to where a familiar figure stood beside the ambulance. Nathan, alive, conscious, talking to a police officer while a paramedic applied a small bandage to his forehead. He looked shaken but unharmed, the perfect picture of a lucky accident victim. My son was performing for the cameras. I was just driving to the store when the brakes completely failed, Nathan was saying, his voice carrying just the right mixture of shock and gratitude. One second everything was fine, the next I couldn't stop at all. Thank goodness I wasn't going very fast. The police officer nodded sympathetically while taking notes. Any history of brake problems with this vehicle? Not that I knew of, Nathan replied, glancing briefly at the camera before returning his attention to the officer. My dad maintains it pretty well. This came out of nowhere. Liar. Perfect, calculating liar. I watched my son's performance with growing horror and unwilling admiration. His body language was flawless, appropriately nervous without appearing guilty, grateful for his survival without seeming rehearsed. The slight tremor in his voice, the way he kept touching the bandage on his forehead, all of it designed to reinforce his image as an innocent victim of mechanical failure. Could have been much worse if I'd been on the highway, Nathan continued. Just goes to show how quickly things can go wrong, you know? Makes you appreciate every day. The irony was suffocating. Nathan was describing the accident he'd planned for me, expressing gratitude for surviving what should have been my death. He'd calculated the timing, the location, even the appropriate emotional response for when the police investigated the tragic loss of William Carter. But instead of grieving for his father, Nathan was giving interviews about his miraculous escape from a car he'd sabotaged himself. My hands shook as I grabbed the phone, dialing directory assistance with fingers that barely functioned. I need a taxi, emergency pickup. My voice cracked on the last word. Address? The dispatcher sounded professionally calm. I gave him the house number, then added, I need to get to Elm Street near the accident scene. How quickly can you be here? 15 minutes, sir. Is this a medical emergency? No, family emergency. I hung up and moved toward the front door, grabbing my wallet and keys from the hall table. In the mirror by the entrance, my reflection looked pale, shocked, older than my 68 years. The face of a man who just watched his son explain to reporters how he'd nearly died in a car meant to kill his father. Nathan expected me to be grateful, expected me to rush to the hospital, weeping with relief that my boy had survived such a terrible accident. Expected me to never question how brake lines could fail so completely, so suddenly, in a car I'd maintained with obsessive care for 15 years. He'd underestimated his old man. The taxi horn honked outside, its sound cutting through the suburban afternoon, quiet like a blade. I took one last look around the living room, where I'd spent the morning worrying about my missing son, then headed for the door. The grieving father was gone. Now came the reckoning. The taxi pulled up to a scene of controlled chaos on Elm Street, red and blue emergency lights painting the autumn afternoon in urgent colors. I paid the driver with trembling hands, my eyes fixed on the crumpled remains of my Ford Taurus being winched onto a flatbed tow truck. The front end was completely destroyed, wrapped around a utility pole like twisted metal origami. Nathan stood near the ambulance, a white bandage stark against his forehead, gesturing animatedly to a police officer who took notes with professional patience. My son looked appropriately shaken, playing his role as fortunate accident victim to perfection. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the spectacle of emergency vehicles and local news cameras. I walked directly toward him, ignoring the yellow police tape and the officer who initially moved to intercept me. I'm William Carter, I told the policeman, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. That's my car, and that's my son. The officer stepped aside with a sympathetic nod. Sorry for your loss, Mr. Carter. Vehicle's a total loss, but your son was very fortunate. Nathan's face went ashen when he saw me approaching. For a split second, his carefully constructed victim persona cracked, revealing the panic underneath. He'd expected grief-stricken calls to the hospital, not his father appearing at the accident scene with questions. Dad, thank goodness you're here. Nathan's recovery was swift, his voice pitched to carry to the watching crowd. I almost died. The brakes just completely failed. I stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough to see the genuine fear in his eyes beneath the theatrical shock. Is this what you plan to do to me, Nathan? Get rid of me to get your inheritance faster? The words dropped like stones into a quiet pond. Nathan's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, his prepared script suddenly useless. The police officer looked between us with growing interest, his pen pausing above his notepad. Are you insane, old man? Nathan's voice rose to near hysteria, but I caught the calculation behind his outrage. I almost died in this accident, and you're accusing me of what? Murder? I'll file a police report about you trying to get me killed. You're not in a position to make demands right now. I pulled my phone from my pocket with deliberate calm, thumb already navigating to the video gallery. Look at this video, son. Nathan's face drained of what little color remained as he recognized the phone in my hand. His eyes darted between my face and the device, understanding dawning like a physical blow. The gathered crowd sensed drama unfolding, pressing closer despite the police presence. That's not what it looks like. Nathan's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through his attempted bravado. I was just checking the oil, maybe tightening something. You can't prove anything from some dark video. I held the phone, where only Nathan could see the screen, watching his face as Friday night's footage played. His own image appeared in the small display. Methodically loosening brake line connections under cover of darkness, then carefully cleaning away evidence of his sabotage. 37 years of raising you, I said quietly, my voice carrying just far enough for Nathan to hear, but not the crowd. And this is what you became. You chose money over your father's life. Nathan grabbed for the phone, but I pulled it back smoothly. His movement caught the attention of the police officer, who stepped closer with professional alertness. Gentlemen, is there a problem here? No problem, officer, I replied, returning the phone to my pocket. Just a father and son working through family difficulties. Nathan's breathing was rapid, shallow. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the October chill, and his hands shook as he ran them through his hair. The same nervous gesture he'd used as a child when caught in lies. Dad, please, he whispered, his voice breaking. I can explain everything. I was desperate. The gambling debts, those men were threatening. The son I loved died with your mother 15 years ago, I interrupted, my words cutting through his excuses like a blade. What stands here now is a stranger who calculated his father's death for pocket change. The tow truck's hydraulics whined as my destroyed Ford was secured to the flatbed. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence between us. Nathan stared at me with the expression of a drowning man watching his last hope disappear beneath the waves. Around us, the accident scene continued its methodical cleanup. The police officer returned to his report. The paramedics packed their equipment, and the curious neighbors began drifting back to their Saturday afternoon routines. But Nathan and I remained frozen in our private tableau of betrayal and consequence. "What happens now?" Nathan asked finally, his voice barely audible. I looked at the wreckage of my car, then at the wreckage of my son, and felt nothing but cold resolve. "Pack your things. You have 1 week." Nathan's face crumpled as the full weight of his failure settled on him. The perfect crime had become perfect evidence, and the inheritance he'd tried to claim early would now slip through his fingers like smoke. I turned away from him and began walking toward the street, leaving Nathan standing alone beside the ambulance. The October afternoon felt lighter somehow, as if a burden I'd carried for years had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Behind me, I heard Nathan call my name once, his voice desperate and pleading. I didn't look back. The taxi ride home passed in silence, broken only by the driver's occasional questions about traffic routes. I sat in the back seat, watching familiar Arlington Heights neighborhoods slide past the window, while my mind processed the afternoon's revelations. The house looked smaller when we pulled into the driveway, less significant somehow, as if Nathan's exposed betrayal had diminished its importance in my life. Inside, the silence felt different, not empty, but cleansed. I walked through rooms that no longer carried the weight of constant worry about Nathan's next crisis or financial manipulation. For the first time in years, the space belonged entirely to me. Nathan's bedroom door stood ajar, revealing the chaos of a 37-year-old man who'd never learned to organize his life properly. I pushed it open and began methodically searching through his belongings, documenting evidence I'd been too trusting to notice before. Credit card statements buried under clothing showed thousands in cash advances from casino ATMs. Betting slips from Arlington Park and Rivers Casino filled shoeboxes with the obsessive detail of addiction. Bank records revealed a pattern of desperate borrowing that painted a clear picture of escalating gambling debts. I photographed everything with my phone, creating an archive of Nathan's deception. Each image reinforced my decision to sever all financial ties permanently. This wasn't youthful irresponsibility. This was calculated predation against the man who'd provided for him his entire life. Sunday morning found me in Stephen Wilson's modest notary office, where Margaret and I had updated our wills 5 years earlier. Wilson was a soft-spoken man who'd known our family since Nathan's childhood, making this conversation particularly difficult. "This is a significant change, William," Wilson said carefully, reviewing the documents I'd requested. "Are you absolutely certain about complete disinheritance?" "My son tried to kill me for money, Stephen. I'm absolutely certain." Wilson's eyebrows rose, but his professional demeanor never wavered. "I'll need that documented in the modification rationale. Any legal challenges will require clear justification for such dramatic changes." We spent 2 hours crafting language that would protect my decision from future contests. Nathan's gambling addiction, the attempted fraud, and the documented evidence of sabotage all found their way into official legal terminology. The veterans' charity I'd selected as beneficiary had an impeccable reputation and legal standing that would make challenges virtually impossible. "The irony," Wilson observed as I signed the final documents, "is that this probably secures more money for charitable causes than your son would have left after his gambling debts." I thought about that as I walked to my car. Nathan's inheritance would have disappeared into casino accounts within months of my death. Now, it would fund housing for homeless veterans and job training programs for those transitioning back to civilian life. Margaret would approve of that choice. Sunday afternoon brought Nathan's return to the house. I heard his key in the lock at 3 o'clock, followed by a long silence as he discovered the packed suitcases and boxes I'd left by the front door. His footsteps moved slowly through the house before he found me in the living room, sitting calmly with the new will document spread across the coffee table. "This is really happening?" Nathan's voice was hoarse, defeated. "You're actually throwing me out? You threw yourself out when you sabotaged my car." I gestured to the legal papers. "These documents formalize what you already accomplished." Nathan collapsed into Margaret's chair without invitation, his head falling into his hands. "Dad, I know I messed up. The gambling got out of control. Those men were threatening me. I wasn't thinking clearly." "You were thinking very clearly," I interrupted. "The sabotage was planned, methodical, professional. You knew exactly what you were doing and who you expected to die. I could go to counseling, Gamblers Anonymous. I could change." "You had 37 years to change. You chose money over family. Now live with that choice." The conversation lasted another hour, Nathan cycling through desperation, anger, and bargaining while I remained unmoved. He threatened to contest the will, report me for elder abuse, claim mental incompetency. Each threat only reinforced my decision to cut all ties permanently. By evening, Nathan's friend Mike had arrived with a borrowed pickup truck. I watched from the living room window as they loaded boxes and suitcases, Nathan's entire adult life fitting into the back of a Ford F-150. 37 years of accumulated possessions, most bought with money I'd provided, disappearing into uncertainty. Nathan paused at the truck's passenger door, looking back at the house where he'd lived rent-free for over a decade. Our eyes met through the window for a final moment, father and son acknowledging the end of something that had died years earlier but never been buried. The truck pulled away as autumn darkness settled over Arlington Heights. I closed the curtains and began planning the house sale that would fund my own new beginning. For the first time in years, I slept peacefully, undisturbed by worry about Nathan's next crisis or manipulation. The silence was profound, healing, complete. December sunlight streamed through the windows of my compact one-bedroom apartment, illuminating Margaret's photograph on the nightstand beside a coffee cup that still steamed with morning warmth. The space was smaller than our old house, but infinitely more peaceful. No room for excess, no hiding places for secrets, no echoes of arguments or manipulation. The letter from disabled American veterans had arrived yesterday, thanking me for the estate planning that would eventually fund their housing program. Reading their newsletter over breakfast had become part of my morning routine, along with reviewing bank statements that showed reduced but adequate finances and preparing for my volunteer shift at the Veterans Center. 2 months had passed since Nathan's departure, and the transformation in my daily life felt miraculous. Where anxiety and financial worry once dominated my thoughts, I now planned activities around helping other people solve real problems. The irony wasn't lost on me. After decades of enabling one man's destructive choices, I'd found purpose in supporting people genuinely working to rebuild their lives. The Arlington Veterans Support Center occupied a converted warehouse on the south side of town, bustling with activity every weekday morning. My role involved helping younger veterans update resumes and navigate job applications, drawing on 40 years of engineering experience to guide career decisions. It was satisfying work, measurable results from people who appreciated guidance rather than demanded money. "Morning, William," Frank Miller called from behind the reception desk. Frank was a retired teacher who'd become my closest friend since I'd started volunteering. "Ready for another day of changing lives?" "Ready as anyone can be at my age," I replied, settling into my assigned workspace with folders of job applications requiring review. The morning brought 3 appointments: a young woman transitioning from military police to civilian law enforcement, a former combat engineer seeking construction work, and a Navy veteran interested in the technical writing. Each conversation reminded me why this work mattered more than accumulating wealth in bank accounts. Sarah Chen, the center coordinator, stopped by my desk during lunch break. "The Jackson family wanted me to thank you again," she said. "Robert started his new job yesterday. Says your resume advice made all the difference." I thought about Nathan while reviewing afternoon appointments. My son had possessed intelligence, mechanical aptitude, and family support that these veterans would have treasured. Yet he'd chosen gambling addiction and attempted murder over building a productive life. The waste seemed criminal now, watching people with genuine challenges work twice as hard for half the opportunities Nathan had squandered. At 4 o'clock, Frank and I walked to the community center for our weekly chess match. The game had become a meditation on strategy and patience, qualities I'd needed more of during Nathan's destructive years. Frank usually won, but the competition kept my mind sharp and provided companionship without emotional manipulation. "You seem more relaxed lately," Frank observed, moving a bishop across the board. "This retirement transition is working out well?" "Helping others gives more satisfaction than accumulating wealth," I replied, studying the board position. "Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them face consequences." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "Family can be the hardest to help, because love makes us blind to their faults." We played in comfortable silence, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the community center's activity room. Around us, other residents pursued their own interests: book clubs, craft groups, gentle exercise classes designed for active seniors. It was a different kind of family, chosen rather than obligated, supportive rather than demanding. Walking back to my apartment that evening, I reflected on the choice that had brought me here. Selling the house had provided enough money for comfortable retirement plus significant charitable contributions. The Veterans Organization would receive my estate, ensuring Nathan's gambling addiction couldn't destroy resources meant to help worthy causes. Margaret would approve of these choices. Her photograph smiled from the nightstand as I prepared for sleep, surrounded by the peaceful silence of a life finally freed from constant crisis. No midnight phone calls about gambling debts. No manipulation disguised as family loyalty. No wondering when the next emergency would arrive. Outside my window, the December evening settled over a community of people who'd chosen kindness over exploitation, mutual support over selfish advantage. Tomorrow would bring new veterans seeking help, fresh opportunities to contribute meaningfully to other people's success, another day of purpose-driven activity. Finally free from the burden I'd placed on myself for 37 years, I understood what Margaret had meant when she'd warned against enabling destructive behavior. Love sometimes required tough choices, and the toughest choice had been acknowledging that saving someone who didn't want to be saved was impossible. The man who had spent 4 decades building a legacy for an ungrateful son now found deeper satisfaction in building hope for grateful strangers who reminded him why life was worth preserving. Peace at last, purpose regained, life rebuilt on foundations that would endure. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.